There are numerous amount of advice in the Blender community. Some pretty good and some is straight up bullshit. So I thought, why not rank them? And starting with the first advice, always use a reference. This is a solid A. Now you may be like, why you put it in A? This is like the most talked about and accepted advice of all time. And don't get me wrong, this is some really good advice. But depending on what you want to make, you don't always need a reference for every single thing. I sometimes find references slowing me down, and I'd rather make something from my visual memory if I'm feeling confident. But if I'm not confident, I always use reference, and I use plenty of them. Second advice is Engguns are bad. This advice goes on B, because Engguns aren't always bad. The times when Engguns become a problem are when you have a mesh that is bending and deforming in some sort of way. For example, a character. Or when you try to use the mesh in a game engine. But when you're simply doing concept art or hard surface, there's practically no need to avoid Engguns. The third advice is probably the best advice in the world, and that is use real world scale. I first heard this in an old video from Andrew Price, which is a great video by the way, where he talked about how simply scaling things to the real world scale makes the scene look so much more realistic. And it's not just for the models, this goes for the textures and even lights. It's a good advice to always keep in mind. Therefore, this goes straight to S. The fourth advice, make daily renders. For this, I think I'm going to put it in C. It's not bad, you just wouldn't learn as much as if you were making renders weekly or even monthly. Because it's a super short amount of time for any sort of problem solving or learning new stuff. As soon as you want to learn something new, the day is over and you have to go on the next project. The only time that I see this work out is when the artist is already experienced enough that it doesn't need much time to learn something new. This next one is some top tier advice, and that is to niche down. It's always good to know what you want to do and what you want to become. Niching down not only make you unique, but it would also make your learning experience so much faster, because you don't have to worry about all the unnecessary stuff. Therefore, I'm going to put this in S. The next advice is to follow the industry standards. I mean, it depends on what you want to do. To be honest, even though I know and use some industry standard software, I still don't see myself working in a studio or something. So I'm going to put this in C tier. Next advice, start with a Blockout. Another great one. I really don't have anything to add to this, just S. That's all I have to say. Now, the next advice is something that we hear a lot, and that is to just practice. Now, from first glance, it doesn't seem like bad advice, but it is. Because it isn't just practicing, it's what you practice and how you practice that thing. So, I'm going to put this in D tier. Next, have a mood board. This one is not that bad. Having a mood board can help you come up with ideas as well as helping you develop a style. But it's not necessary. There are a lot of artists who don't have mood boards and produce great original work. For that, I'm going to put this in A tier. This one is more of a myth than an advice, and that is to not download assets, which is just a straight ass. There's no point in making something if you already know how to make it. So this goes right down to F tier. This next advice is something that I've given before in one of my videos, and it's quantity over quality. Meaning that instead of putting a large amount of time on a single artwork, you instead put that effort into multiple artworks, which is better for learning. I've talked about it in more depth in my other video, so you can go watch that. With that said, I agree that sometimes doing passion projects and projects that are overall bigger and more time consuming can also help you improve in different aspects. Next, use Blender for everything. This can be both good or bad. Really depends on what you want to do. I used to use separate software for each different task. Substance Painter for texturing, Marvelous Designer for cloth, Gaia for the trains, etc, etc. But then I realized that using multiple software really slows me down. So now my workflow is mostly just Blender and DaVinci Resolve for post-processing. The only time that I use other software is when I genuinely cannot do what I want to do inside Blender. Therefore, I'm going to give this a C. The next advice is to ask for feedback. I do see the value in some honest feedback, and I do think that is really helpful, but it depends on who you are seeking feedback from and how you use that feedback. Because believe me when I say this, there are a lot of people who don't know the correct way of using feedback. I'm not going to get into details on how to use feedback, but for now I'm just going to state that feedbacks are not for everyone, but they're good if you know how to use them. So I'm going to put this in B. This next advice is really good for keeping your mental sanity, assuming you still have some. And that is to not compare your work. I don't have anything against it. The only thing that I would add to this is that although comparing your work to others is bad, do not be afraid to learn from other people's work, because there is just some great value from looking up to others that are better than you. Therefore, I'm going to put this in A. Next advice, get out of your comfort zone. Getting out of your comfort zone is not only good for Blender, but it also works for real life too. Like, if you get out of your comfort zone, you're going to establish so many other things and learn so many other things. So, instant S. No doubt. And the last advice is a little more practical, and that is to not use PNGs for your render format. And it's pretty much true, unless you don't do post-processing. Because there are a lot of people who worry about rendering everything in EXR 32 bits with like aces and all that, when they don't even post-process their renders, and they're just making things more complicated for themselves. So I'm going to put this in A. And this is my list. If you disagree with me, which you probably do, let me know in the comments. And with that said, thanks a lot for watching. Bye. See ya.